So, welcome to part two of What to Eat. If you haven't listened to part one yet, I would encourage you to do so because the material you're going to receive here in part two builds upon part one. Imagine that. So, we're going to go over a couple of things. One, we're going to go over a number of common pitfalls and reasons for unfavorable results. And two, which is actually going to be the first thing, is the diet check record sheet. So before we get to that, we're going to do a review from part one. You should have downloaded the food guidelines in metabolic typing form. The food guidelines to give you the basis of eating real nourishing food meant for all human beings. And then the metabolic typing form to get you started on the path to dialing in your macronutrients, such as protein, carbohydrates, and fats, to something that's ideal for you as an individual. And then, of course, listening to your body. And we're going to look at that a little bit more with this diet check record sheet right here. So this is something that can also be downloaded from the same spot on the Life site where all the other forms are located. What this form is it's a reaction form. So you need to fill this out after every meal for about 7 to 14 days, ideally. And you're going to fill it out 1 to 2 hours after the meal. So as it says here, pretty simple, place a check to the left of all descriptions that describe your experience 1 to 2 hours after a meal. And it's important to adhere to that rule, 1 to 2 hours. Because what you're looking for is as you start eating better, you should slowly transition to the point where you're checking off much more blue items than you are red. So if after eating a meal you're checking off several of these red items, then you know you did something incorrect. You either didn't eat the right protein, carb, or fat amounts, or maybe you ate just too much food overall, or maybe you ate too fast. There's a number of different things, and we're going to look at those in a moment, but at least with filling out the form, it allows you to become mindful about what you're eating. And that's the whole point, is that in many cases people are having negative reactions to food, but yet they just feel it as a negative reaction. They don't really associate it with their food. But yet, let's just say, gee, every time you eat, well, let's say every time after you have a sandwich, you tend to feel that the meal gave too much or too little energy, and maybe energy tanked from meal, exhaustion, sleepiness, drowsiness. Maybe you check these two, and boy, it seems every time after you write over here that you had a sandwich of some sort, that happens. And then you got to say, well, what could it be? Could it be the bread? Could it be I'm always eating the same sandwich and it happens to be the chicken sandwich that I'm having? You know, it does take a little bit deeper work, but at least it gets you mindful to that something's going on. So you're playing a little bit of a detective. So it's pretty simple. And you need to do it for your 3 main meals a day. And again, it's not forever. Ideally, you can have things dialed in with 7 to 14 days. So it is a little bit of work in the beginning, but it's not forever. So let's take a look at the first reason for unfavorable results, and that is contaminated food. So a lot of our conventional food, I would say just about all of our conventional food, has a lot of toxicity in it, such as different hormones, pesticides, antibiotic residues, rodenticides, herbicides, genetically modified organisms, which is genetically engineered foods, food additives, flavorings, all these different things, from processed foods. It's pretty common in our environment, as I discussed in part one. And the reason this can really mess with you with how you interpret the way foods make you feel is because, quite frankly, when you eat foods that have a high amount of contamination from these things right in here, you could be feeling or sensing the pesticide residues or the hormone residues or the food additives. It could be one of those things that are giving you those symptoms, not the food itself. So if you sit down and you have some tomato with broccoli and a steak and it's all conventional, then you are going to have some hormones in there or antibiotics, and you're definitely going to have some pesticide residues, herbicide residues, you're going to have these things in there. So if you're trying to figure out how foods make you feel, and that after you eat that meal, you're like, oh, geez, I don't feel wonderful from that, then it could very likely be because of these toxic components. So you start getting the wrong signals, or you're misinterpreting the signals, I guess is the best way to put it. The signals you're getting is from the chemicals in the food, not really the food itself. So if you were to eat that same food but have it be from organic sources, you may not experience the problem. So the point is that if you've been working on it for a little while and you don't really seem to be dialing in, and you're still checking off a lot of red marks on the diet check record sheet, it could be because of this problem. This is one possibility. Now, if you're struggling with purchasing the organic food, one thing you can do to offset your toxic burden is to go to the EWG's website that I have here at foodnews.org and download their Dirty Dozen and Clean 15 list. So I have a list of the Dirty Dozen right here, which is all these different foods. Those are the foods that have been shown to have a higher level of pesticide residue. So we're not talking about herbicides or fungicides or rodenticides, anything like that. We're just talking about pesticides right now. So these foods have been shown to be higher. These 12 have been shown to be higher in pesticides residues compared to foods on the Clean 15 list. So go ahead and just download that form. You'll see what the Clean 15 is. And that can be a way for you to at least take steps towards mitigating the amount of toxic exposure that you're getting. And when it comes to eating these foods on the Dirty Dozen list, maybe that's a place where you could tend to go off into the organic realm a little bit as your funds allow. Portion size. So this is a big one. So even though you're eating in the right macronutrient balance, if you're eating too much, that's definitely going to cause a problem, such as cravings, bloat, indigestion, fatigue. And typically, in many cases, if you are eating in the right macronutrient breakdown for you and you've dialed in your metabolic typing, in many cases, appetite just takes care of itself, but not always. We do have social programming. Definitely, as many of us have grown up, we've been raised to clean our plates and eat until it's completely gone. We've just been raised in these environments that cause us to eat a lot of food, and that has a big psychological impact that carries with us throughout most of our life, unless we change it, of course. So this is another reason why if you're having trouble dialing things in, you're getting fatigue after you eat, you need to look at your portion size. Quite frankly, most people eat way too much, and maybe that's happening with you. So you need to honestly look at it and experiment with it. Try eating less. It's not going to kill you to eat less. Try eating 75% of what you normally eat at your lunch. See how it makes you feel. If you feel the same and you don't really feel any worse, well, maybe you're still eating too much. Try bringing it down even a little bit more. You may get to the point where you just be like, well, geez, I didn't eat that much, so I'm hungry within an hour. So you might develop another symptom. Then you could say, well, maybe I'm eating too little now, and maybe eating too much isn't necessarily the problem. But my point is you have to experiment with it a little bit. Otherwise, you're not really going to know. Eating too fast, very common. Again, some of us have been raised this way, but eating fast is usually a product of a busy lifestyle. So typically when people have a lot of things on their plate, they want to get things done, you eat hurriedly so you can just get on to whatever it is you have to do. Obviously, that's definitely a problem, and it's a tough thing for people to change. But you have to work on it, especially if this is creating the issue. I personally dealt with this issue in the past for many years, and I would certainly experience heartburn, bloat, burping, and sometimes sleepiness following a meal if I would eat even the best food. If I just eat it too fast, it's going to be a problem. Our stomachs are not very well designed to mechanically break down food. The stomach's responsibility is to chemically break down food, primarily with hydrochloric acid. Now, if we're not properly mechanically breaking our food down with our teeth, that means the muscular walls of our stomach have to start working really hard. And in some cases, that can create stomach ache. And that's how we get a stomach ache, is by those muscles getting cramped. We have 3 layers of muscles in our stomach. It's actually quite a muscular organ, and it's there to do the work if it needs to, but ideally it shouldn't have to. So chew your food. Waiting too long between meals, another very common one. Blood sugar needs to be stable as much as possible for you to be healthy, lean, or to lose weight, to gain health, whatever it is. Blood sugar stability is absolutely critical. And many of us go too long between meals, which is not ideal for most of us. So if you're typically eating lunch around noon or 1 o'clock, and then not eating again until 6, 7 o'clock, and you got 5, 6, or even more hours spanning, and maybe all you had in the middle there was just some light cookie or a muffin or something like that, that is very unlikely to be enough for at least most people. So my suggestion is to not go longer than 3 to 4 hours without some type of substantial food. And when I say substantial food, I'm not talking about a lot of food. I'm talking about real food. So a muffin, even though it can be derived from using real ingredients, especially if it's homemade, isn't always going to work for most people, because eating a muffin on its own usually does not fit into the metabolic type for, I'd say, 95% of the people. So when I'm talking about eating substantial food, I'm really talking about eating a small amount of chicken or a small amount of any protein, and then combining that with some type of vegetation would be ideal. So you need to really look at meal timing, because that could be the detriment in you trying to gain success right now. So really work on that one. And I know that's tough as we get busy, but it is important. Changes in optimal fuel source during the day. So what we eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and some of our snacks in between, really, sometimes it's the same for people, not always. So if we're having breakfast, I notice a lot of times people really lean towards things like granola and yogurt and a little bit of fruit in the morning, where at night they may want a steak with some vegetables, where in the morning the steak and vegetables is just not going to work for them. Well, that's fine. You just need to understand that. So if you get pegged down to a metabolic type and you're like, wow, I really feel great when I have some type of animal flesh and vegetation, so I'm going to try to do that every meal. Well, keep listening to your body, because, maybe eating that kind of food in the morning or at lunch or whatever time of the day may not work for you. So this is just something to think about. And also changes in optimal fuel source during stressful times. Stress accelerates the breakdown of your body. When you're under more stress, you use or burn up way more cells than if you're in a relaxed state. So basically you speed up the aging process, simply put. And it also uses up a lot more neurotransmitters in the brain as well. So not only do you use up a lot more amino acids in your muscles, your bones, and your organs, and you break down those tissues quicker, but you're also using your feel-good chemicals in your brain. You're using them up a lot more. So typically, in high-stress times, a person will need more building foods, and building foods tend to be proteins and fats, and for neurotransmitter production, higher purine foods. So this isn't the case across the board, but just keep that in mind, that in high-stress times, you want to try to counteract the accelerated breakdown from the stress by taking steps towards building the body up, and that is with protein and fat foods. So it doesn't mean you need to increase them by a lot, but you may just find that you need to increase them a little bit. And here's some typical purine foods. And the reason I'm talking about purine foods right here for neurotransmitter production is because in times of chronic stress, anxiety and depression can come on. And we want to keep those neurotransmitters healthy so our thought process can stay strong. Not exercising. Okay. So we have 6 foundational principles of health. And food is one of them. Of course, we're talking about that here. Exercise is another. And then we have water, breathing, thoughts, and sleep. So manipulating any or all of those 6 can either create or distract from health. So either we make health or break it. So in this talk, we're discussing food. However, it's important to understand that exercise acts as a catalyst for all other foundational principles of health. So all those 6 foundational principles can really be aided by just simply exercise. I find when people get into an exercise program, they sleep better. They migrate towards eating better food. They tend to drink the right amount of liquids. They start breathing better. Their thought process improves. So they no longer have as much stinking thinking. And their breathing improves as well. So all these improvements from exercise. So I find exercise to be the catalyst to being the motivator or the motivation behind eating well. So if you've dialed in how to eat correctly, or it's just a motivation issue, and you're really struggling, then I would suggest taking up some exercise. Another thing, exercise increases the energy in the body. I should say proper exercise. If you over-exercise, that could actually decrease your energy. But maybe the sluggishness that you're feeling mid-afternoon is not so much from the food you ate at lunch, but it could be because you're just somebody who doesn't use their body enough. And when you don't use your body enough, the body gets stagnant. It gets kind of complacent, stagnant, stiff, immobile. You become rigid, and that's a drain. That's not good on the body, and that does sap your energy. So definitely consider exercise if straightening out your food doesn't really seem to be working. Okay, protein powders. So this is a common product that people tend to take in the exercise world. And I don't recommend it unless you got some type of digestive reason why you need it. So I have recommended this to people in the past. It's not frequent that I do that, but when I have, it's because of an underlying digestive issue where the person needed to withhold a lot of their foods and they really needed building. In other words, they were having trouble handling flesh foods, protein foods. So we have to get the nutrients in somehow, so this is better than nothing. But this is a far cry. Whey protein powder or any of your protein powders out there, especially the commercial ones, are a far cry from the quality of protein that you're going to get from real food. So if you are going to entertain using these powders, I would at least suggest taking them along with some fat source. Doesn't have to be a lot. Depends on your metabolic type. But if you are going to take them, do something like flaxseed oil. That seems to really help with the absorption. It's actually a better way of just balancing out the food, because we are not supposed to just consume protein in isolation on its own. That can create bone issues, acidity issues where it starts leaching calcium from our bones. Not a good idea. So we do need the fat to absorb the protein as well. So just be careful with this stuff. And another thing too is that these protein sources are almost always derived from cows that have been injected with genetically modified recombinant bovine growth hormone. And again, you just want to try to keep your toxic exposure down. And I know these protein powders have been heavily marketed. You see images of bodybuilders and lean physiques and all kinds of professional athletes endorsing these products. That's nothing but advertising, and that's all it is. Has nothing to do with health, nutrition. Has very little to do with fitness and performance as well, unfortunately. So I would think twice before using these. And finally, retest monthly. As your body changes, the right fuel mixture is going to change as well, or very likely change. And it does for many, many people. So the more unhealthy you are, the more likely you're going to change as you go along in your eating program. Because let's just say you've spent the last 10 years neglecting yourself, you're eating horribly, you haven't really been exercising, you've maybe put on 50 or more pounds, your energy has gone down, and now you're sick of it, it's time to turn things around. And you find that, gee, by getting rid of your processed food and shopping around the outside perimeter of the store and eating mostly protein foods, maybe you're eating 60% protein foods, 20% vegetable foods, and 20% fats, and you're feeling great from that. Well, you could be feeling great mainly because you lowered all those starchy garbage carbohydrates that you typically eat and all those processed foods, and really going to any level of real food is going to make you feel better because you're starting to cleanse and detoxify yourself. That doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the food plan that's going to work for you in the long term, but it's working for you now. You may find in 30 days, 60 days, sometime down the road that, gee, eating the high protein and the lower veggie and the moderate fat way of eating isn't ideal. You may start migrating more towards a vegetable base that's ideal for you. So it can change. So don't get married to one specific way of eating because it helps you now. It very well could be the program that is good for you for the long haul, but it's very likely to change. And it's more likely to change the more unhealthy you are getting into a program. And also there's other issues as far as parasites and fungal overgrowth. These can definitely create strong carbohydrate cravings. So if you're doing everything you can based on the information you've learned in part 1 and part 2, and you're still, maybe you've gained some ground, but yet not everything's really coming around, then definitely reach out to us on the Life Team. There's some information we can give you, and it may be something like a parasite or fungal issue or something else, maybe something more simple, but just reach out to us. So I hope this has been helpful, and I look forward to hearing your successes and even some of your issues, because we're all in here together and we're looking to create a healthier company and society. And of course, each of us as individuals need to be as healthy as we can so we can experience life to its fullest, because after all, we are just a soul inside a vehicle called the human body, and that's what we use to experience life.